This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. Frantic oil buying driven by supply outages and signs the Omicron variant won't be as disruptive as feared has pushed some crude grades to multi-year highs, suggesting the rally in Brent futures could be sustained a while longer, traders said. Prices for physical cargoes do not always trade in tandem with oil futures, and when differentials widen rapidly and considerably, they can indicate speculators have oversold or overbought futures versus fundamentals. Brent oil futures have jumped 10% since the start of the year, but the physical market is still racing ahead, with differentials for some grades hitting multi-year highs, suggesting a tight market will push the futures rally on.
Oil prices were steady on Monday as investor bets that global supply will remain tight amid restraint by major producers were offset by a rise in Libyan output. Brent crude was down 12 cents, or 0.1%, at $85.94 a barrel by 14:20 GMT. Earlier in the session, the contract touched its highest since October 3, 2018, at $86.71. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was up 6 cents, or 0.1%, at $83.88 after touching its highest since November 10 at $84.78. Frantic oil buying, driven by supply outages and signs the Omicron coronavirus variant will not be as disruptive to fuel demand as previously feared, has pushed some crude grades to multi-year highs, suggesting the rally in Brent futures could be sustained for a while longer, traders said.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
China's refinery output hit a record in 2021, up 4.3% from 2020, on robust first-half fuel demand and as refiners ramped up processing to fill a supply gap after a hefty new tax closed loopholes in blending fuel imports. Total refinery throughput last year reached 703.55 million tons, or 14.07 million barrels per day. BPD data from the National Bureau of Statistics showed on Monday, roughly 620,000 barrels of oil per day above the 2020 level. December output was 58.73 million tons, or 13.83 million barrels of oil per day, down 2.1% on year, reversing a rebound in November when state refiners raised processing to plug a short-lived diesel supply crunch.
India's gasoil sales declined in the first fortnight of January as rising COVID-19 infections hit consumer spending and truck movement in the country. Gasoil sales by the country's state fuel retailers amounted to 2.47 million tons during January 1-15, data compiled by state-owned refiners showed, down by 14.1% from the same period in December and about 5% from a year ago. Sales were down about 8% from the same period in 2020. Truck movement declined to 75% in January 1-15 from 85% in December, said S.P. Singh, Senior Fellow at Indian Foundation for Transport Research and Training.
Next, we have the top news in metal.
China's annual aluminium output rose 4.8% from the previous year to a record in 2021, official data showed on Monday, reaching 38.5 million tons despite curbs on energy consumption at factories imposed to meet climate goals last year. Primary aluminium output for December was 3.11 million tons, the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) said, slightly up from 3.10 million tons in November and 4% lower year-on-year. On a daily basis, the December output worked out to about 100,300 tons a day versus about 103,300 tons in November, the lowest daily rate since July 2020, according to Reuters calculations.
A bipartisan piece of legislation introduced in the U.S. Senate on Friday would force defense contractors to stop buying rare earths from China by 2026 and use the Pentagon to create a permanent stockpile of the strategic minerals. The bill, sponsored by Senators Tom Cotton, an Arkansas Republican, and Mark Kelly, an Arizona Democrat, is the latest in a string of U.S. legislation seeking to thwart China's near control over the sector. It essentially uses the Pentagon's purchase of billions of dollars worth of fighter jets, missiles and other weapons as leverage to require contractors to stop relying on China and, by extension, support the revival of U.S. rare earths production. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. Nearly a third of India's rice exports for this month are stuck due to a shortage of freight trains, and most traders have stopped signing February export contracts to avoid demurrage charges, industry officials told Reuters. The slowdown in exports from India, the world's biggest rice exporter, has allowed rival suppliers such as Thailand, Myanmar and Vietnam to increase overseas sales at higher prices. Slowing exports could force the Indian government to increase procurement from farmers. Shipments of more than 500,000 tons of non-basmati rice that need to be transported to ports on India's east coast from the central state of Chhattisgarh have been stuck due to the shortage of freight trains, dealers said.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.